of course, we think about the code. It's always about the code, right? You're a software engineer attending a software engineering interview. The job requires you to write code, so you're focused on the code, which is fair. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of other stuff that's involved that many developers are not paying attention to in a software interview. These are mistakes that people make time and time again that come back to bite them, irrespective of how good the code itself is that they're writing in the coding rounds of the interviews. So in this video, I will share 5 surprising but common, and in fact, surprisingly common mistakes that I've seen engineers make in software engineering interview process. And this has nothing to do with writing incorrect code. These mistakes might be holding you back even if you have performed great technically. So my goal in this video is to get you thinking about these and how you can avoid them. See how many of these you've made in the past and perhaps you're still making. Starting with mistake number 1, not tailoring your examples to the role's specific requirements. This is a very common mistake that I've seen time and time again, where engineers don't tailor their answers or examples in response to any specific demands for the role that they're interviewing for. They just give generic examples rather than really thinking about how it relates to this particular role's requirement. And then looking at your work history to identify any suitable experiences, suitable incidents where you've demonstrated the necessary skills or expertise. That all takes time. But you're going to be doing this ahead of an in-person interview, and you're already investing time in an in-person interview. So you might as well do a little bit more research and preparation to plan ahead of time. Here are a few things that you need to be looking at, right? First, you need to know what the actual skills and experience the employer or the prospective employer has listed in the job postings. Do you have the skills to match those? If so, you're going to highlight it, right? If not, then highlight those that are close to the skills that they need, right? This doesn't have to be restricted just to job posting details, by the way. You can also look at some of the other clues and hints about what the company values. So for example, you can look at the company's tech stack by looking at the company's tech blog if it exists, right? Look at the company's GitHub profile if it exists. Read through the recent blog posts and learn what technical challenges they have faced or solved recently. So for example, if their recent blog post has significant focus on perhaps scalability or reliability of systems, or maybe some cross-functional collaboration with other teams, have some stories from your experience to highlight that in the interviews, right? These examples you pick should reflect those aspects. Okay, even if you don't want to tailor your experience to what the company wants in an interview, don't you want to know what the tech stack is of the company that you will be working in if you get the job? Aren't you curious? I don't get that part. Anyway, don't do this mistake, right? Do some groundwork on the company, what it's doing, what it probably values, and then have some important points to try and showcase from your experience whenever you get a chance in the interview. You will stand apart from a lot of other candidates who might have similar experiences, but they just don't tailor it for what the company needs. Mistake number 2, not demonstrating the problem-solving process. Okay, this mistake is not as common, but I see many engineers failing at it. They're so focused on solving the problem itself that they don't demonstrate the thought process for arriving at the solution, which is something that interviewers are always keen to understand and assess. The way you think about the problem is just as important as your ability to solve the problem. So when you go through a coding round, make sure you communicate what you're doing every step of the way. Explain why you made certain choices and why you use those choices to solve these problems. And even if you get stuck for some time on an issue, talk about that. It's perfectly fine and normal to get stuck. If anything, the interviewer wants to know, how can this person think through a problem? Can they articulate what they're trying to do? And then demonstrate how they solved it. Don't make the mistake of being too silent when you go through these coding rounds. Don't just jump into writing code right away. I mean, it's fine if all you want to do is to solve a problem and show off your skill of solving problems quickly or efficiently. But remember, interviewers are not looking for speed coding engineers, right? They're trying to understand how well can this person think through and work through a problem. How good is their thought process? Can they explain it clearly to others? There are some obvious strategies like writing down pseudocode before jumping into writing actual code. This will demonstrate your ability to think through things logically. It can also help avoid mistakes or bugs in your actual implementation when you actually get down to writing the code. So talk through what you're doing every step of the way. This is an essential must-do in any interview. Beyond that, if you're really interested in leveling up your interview game, you need to use certain strategies that clearly demonstrate your ability to problem solve. These strategies will give you a huge advantage in interviews, even if you don't know how to solve a specific problem itself. And I actually have a full video explaining these strategies. Go check that out after this video. You will also find this in the video description. So go watch that after you're done with this one. Mistake number 3. As software developers, we sometimes forget that even though the software we write is a core part of our world, this is often not a core part of many of our current and future employees' worlds. For many companies, software is just a means to an end. In fact, this might be true for almost all companies, right? Most companies are a business. They're in the business of making money. And while software plays a crucial role in that, it's only a piece of the puzzle. Software developers need to understand that aspect. Many times during interviews, people overlook this aspect and focus solely on the technical side. This is especially true when the interviewer is asking you about your current or previous experience. I've seen candidates spend hours and hours talking about data structures and frameworks and libraries when I actually wanted to know what it is that the product or solution did that they were trying to build and why. I cannot stress enough how important it is to keep in mind like the bigger picture, the bigger context, the business context of the project that you're trying to work on. So when you're discussing past experiences, discuss the impact it had on the company's bottom line. What was the goal of the project? What was the company trying to do? What was the end result? Did it save costs? Did it increase revenue? Did it improve user satisfaction? Prepare some examples of how your technical work has contributed to business goals. All these questions are very relevant to the business, and understanding the answers to those questions will give the interviewer much better insight into you and your work rather than you just talking about the technology or the framework used. This stuff is also great for writing your resume, by the way. Don't just mention your technology in your resume. Always have the business context surrounding the technology. You used a framework, but what was the solution that you built using the framework, and why did the business care? Sometimes the interviewer is interested in understanding your approach towards building features. They want to know how you collaborated with other team members, right? Designers or product managers in delivering value to users within challenges like tight deadlines. It's not just past projects. It's the same when you discuss potential solutions to the problems posed by the interviewer, right? Always take a holistic approach when possible and consider like what are the larger implications of any changes that you propose, right? Consider the costs and benefits and discuss the trade-offs, right? Avoid making this mistake of ignoring the business perspective during your interviews, right? Remember, most companies are businesses. And yes, technology is critical for their operation, but it's not their sole focus. So go beyond the technology, right? Consider what the user's needs are and how your software fits into that larger ecosystem. And more importantly, what problem are you trying to solve for the business? Understand the business context and highlight that in your interview. Don't just keep talking about frameworks and libraries. They're important, but always have that context. And this will be a key differentiator for you when you're performing in interviews. Mistake number 4, underestimating the importance of code readability. This one should not surprise you, but I see this happen so often in coding interviews. Code readability matters more than you think. Okay, I get it. In a coding interview, you're focused on getting the functionality correct. That's a primary objective in an interview after all. But like I keep saying, the journey matters more than the final result. This is another equally important consideration that often gets overlooked. The importance of writing clean and readable code throughout the interview. Interviewers care a lot about code readability because it reflects your thought process and problem-solving abilities. Interviewers are not only interested in finding out whether your code works, but also how easy it is to follow and maintain. They want to see how you structure your thoughts and how you approach your problems from start to finish. I've seen so many coding interview solutions that look less like code and more like math equations, right? Say A equals B minus calculate of C. If you write code like this, you're really making the interviewer work hard to follow what you're doing. Instead, imagine you wrote the same code as something like this. Customer charge is MSRP minus calculate discount of product ID. I don't even have to tell you what the context is or what the code is doing. Just that one line makes everything clear. But you might argue it doesn't matter since you're only writing code for the duration of the interview and it's not longer term. It might be true, but still it shows how you think about coding and problem solving. If you produce sloppy and unreadable code, it tells the interviewer that you're someone who rushes into solutions without thinking about the broader implications. And the interviewer thinks, okay, if I hire this person, they're probably going to write the same kind of sloppy code on the job. And right, that's not a good impression to make. So here are some simple ways to improve code readability during interviews. And a lot of them are things that you should be doing anyway when you write code, right? Things like use descriptive names for variables, right? Another thing is to write clear and concise comments. Take time to think about what a method or class name should be, what the type structure should be. If you're not whiteboarding, but instead you're typing like on a shared editor where you can do things like add single line comments for pieces of code, make sure you do that, right? Make sure your indentation and formatting is clean. These are just some basic things that can help improve the readability of your code and makes it easy for the interviewer to follow along. In summary, don't underestimate the importance of code readability, right? Make sure you're writing clean and readable code that demonstrates your professional attitude and basically reduces friction during the interview process itself. Moving on to mistake number 5, failing to reflect critically on past projects. This 5th mistake is probably the most common one that I've seen. Engineers fail to reflect critically on their past projects or learnings, especially when they're asked about achievements in the previous roles. Here's some news for you. Not everything goes well all the time in our work. It's just a fact. Sometimes projects succeed, sometimes projects fail, sometimes we mess up. We always find an opportunity to learn from our mistakes, and that's really our job. And when you're in an interview, you can showcase that you've learned from our mistakes, right? But unfortunately, not many people do this. Many people miss a chance to highlight this. Whenever I've seen somebody talk about their previous experience in an interview, it's always glowing positivity. It was a brilliant project. Everything went well. The business doubled. They won Employee of the Year. All right, this is great in general. Don't get me wrong. You have to sell yourself in an interview. But sometimes, maybe sometimes, also share how something didn't go so well and you learned from it. Because guess what? That's also another way to sell yourself in an interview. If you're reflecting critically, that means that you're thinking deeply about what went wrong in your past projects. So you're identifying what lessons you've learned and what you gained from making those mistakes, right? When you're discussing past projects, try to frame it in terms of specific challenges you faced, how you approached them, what worked, what didn't work, and ultimately, what was the lesson learned? What would you do differently this time given a similar situation again? During interviews, the interviewer may ask you about specific projects that you worked on or specific challenges that you had to overcome. Use this opportunity to showcase your growth and your learning from those experiences. Don't just give like a superficial answer about how you solved the problem and how great your solution was. Talk about some time when you might have made some non-ideal choices. Discuss what you learned from that experience and then share examples of how you applied those learnings in subsequent projects. Now, you don't want to be doing this all the time, of course. If you just list your failures, you know what that's going to do, right? However, if you mention 3 success stories and 1 tiny failure, it kind of gives credibility to your stories. And it shows that you can be honest with yourself and with the interviewer about what you could have done better, right? It shows maturity, it shows self-awareness, which are highly valued traits. You come across as someone who takes responsibility for their actions and is committed to improving continuously. So in general, failing to reflect critically on your past projects and learnings is, I think, a missed opportunity. It's a big mistake. It limits your ability to show how you can grow and learn from your experiences. During interviews, use these opportunities to demonstrate this. Show how you have turned challenges into opportunities for learning and growth. This will set you apart from other candidates. Also, increase your chances of getting the job. So in conclusion, keep these mistakes in mind and notice them when you're doing them. Sometimes old habits die hard, but kind of constantly reaffirming these ideas helps correct things over time, right? Come back and watch these videos ahead of interviews so that you sink these ideas deep into your brain so you can catch yourself before you make these mistakes, not after you make these mistakes. Now, let me know in the comments below if there are any of these mistakes that you find yourself making in an interview. Or perhaps you got tips on how to avoid these mistakes, or maybe even additional mistakes that you make that you want to add to the list. Let me know in the comments. And then go watch this video where I share with you 5 really effective strategies to stand out in an interview by showcasing your problem-solving skills over here.